Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome SBI Podcast listeners and video podcast viewers. My name is Drew Kiran, and with me is my co-host, Andrew Urtiaga. We are both principals at SBI, a sales and marketing consultancy dedicated to helping you make your number. This is the weekly SBI podcast, and its purpose is to share insights and information relevant to your business. But before we get started, an interesting fact about both of us, besides we both share the same first name, is we both have pretty long careers in martial arts, right? I spent 27 years, I guess, now, and you're at 17 years?
17. So
what this means to your audience is if we can't agree on the topic, we'll settle it in a cage fight. You're not still mad at me for hitting you in the kidney last time, are you?
No. I'll just sweep the leg next time.
Okay, so what are we talking about here today?
On today's show, we'll be reviewing a recent podcast that Drew and I listened to titled $1 Million Insights, Joining the Agile Sales Revolution by Jill Konrath. Jill was recently interviewed by Insight Squared. Insight Squared is a company that delivers sales performance analytics for companies of any size. Just a little bit about Jill. She's a speaker, author, a thought leader who focuses on sharing fresh strategies in today's sales world. She has an impressive following on her website, and she has over 130,000 subscribers. So I'd say that she's a qualifier. She's a qualifier.
Yep. So in the podcast, Jill explains how B2B salespeople can adapt quickly to change, learn new skills faster, and improve their sales results. So during the interview, Jill unveils the keys to adopting an agile learning and brings us up to speed on, number one, being tired of sales strategies you should stop using. Number two is how to accelerate your company's sales. 3 was the sales performance that you must track. And number 4 was the key advice for sales VPs everywhere. So we don't have enough time to cover everything today on the recording, but let's just touch on a few highlights. So Andrew, what did you think?
Yeah, there are some things that I liked, but then in the infamous words of Ron Burgundy and Anchorman, let's just agree to disagree, okay? So a couple examples. Let's dissect the podcast one at a time.
Yep.
There was a question posed around what are the keys to accelerate growth quickly? Why don't we listen in?
Okay.
What do you think is the key to accelerating sales growth quickly? And what's the first thing a sales organization should change in order to improve sales results?
I think is the key. I think, first of all, you have to look for the right kind of people. And you have to look for people who have a higher chance of being successful in the job, because you can do all you want to try to get existing people or slower moving people or non-thinking people up to speed, but they're just not going to make it. So one of the keys is to really look for top performers or people who have the potential to be top performers, meaning they set a goal, they stick with it, they don't quit, they just keep going. You know, they've got a mindset of experimentation and they don't see themselves as a failure. So doing that and getting that kind of person on board is crucial to accelerating sales. But you know, you have this team and you have to look around and you say, well, what are the bottlenecks? I mean, what is creating the slowness in their sales process? So it can't just be one thing. It really has to be starting with an assessment of where are we running into troubles? And, you know, is it right up front? Do we have enough quality prospects in the pipeline? And again, I would say that may not just be a sales issue. That might be a marketing issue. It might be about the website. It might be the lack of lead generation. So you have to look at it holistically and say, where does the problem start?
So one of the things, Drew, if you heard in there, she said, look for the right kind of people.
Right.
So I disagree with this statement, or at least it's partially correct, right?
Why?
It's an incomplete sentence. Well, once again, when we think about success and how organizations measure success, it's an equation. It's 50% performance conditions, and then it's 50% talent.
Okay.
Right? So she mentioned the talent, but she didn't discuss the performance conditions. So I can take A players and put them in an environment where there's no process, no tools, no support, no strategy, no sense of direction, and I might get some type of success, call it the effort of the heroic few, but overall, that's not gonna help me accomplish my goals or at least accelerate growth rapidly. The second thing here is that she defined the environment as strategy. So you know this type of person you need to execute inside the strategy. You do need to define that. But the one thing that she talks about it is in the context of sales strategy. And I think we need to be broader in today's marketplace, right? The entire ecosystem is the revenue growth value chain. So what do we mean by that? That's the market. Do we have a deep understanding of the market? Do we understand what the corporate strategy is? Do we understand the products that we're going to go to market with? Do we understand what type of demand we're creating with the marketing strategy? Then the sales strategy, which is converting that demand into revenue. And then finally, the talent strategy, the type of people that we need.
Yeah,
so why don't we put it... Go ahead.
And how often do you hear when you're talking to somebody too and you ask them that about their strategy and they give you a section, right? They talk about a sales strategy or this or that, where they're not looking at it, across the whole horizontal chain, right?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And I think that's what was happening in last year. What we found in our research report is that people had started to develop strategies, but they were functional strategies in isolation from one another. If you paid attention as well, Drew, one of the things that she said, I know I have to check in because sometimes I lose you. One of the things that she explained in there is finding where the bottlenecks are. Right in the funnel, which is inside of sales strategy. So if you
Well, wait a second. I agree with finding where the bottlenecks are. So what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it, but it's one small piece, right? So it's kind of like if you're taking your car to the mechanic and you're saying, hey, I got a flat tire, but the car is stalling. Okay. You got to look at the engine, right? You got to look at the entire car to see what's wrong with it.
Right.
So when you look at the value chain on the screen for our viewers, and if you're listening in, we talked about the growth value chain being the market, corporate, product, marketing, sales, and talent. She hits on one link, which is the sales strategy. What I would suggest is you blow that up or expand the customer life cycle across the entire value chain.
Right.
So where are the bottlenecks on the growth, revenue growth value chain that we just explained?
Yeah, and I can walk our audience through that, but I completely understand what you're saying too, where she's looking at one section of it too. We're saying you have to take the holistic view and look at it all the way across too. So what you start with, the first one's market, right? Market research too, because market research is really just getting a deep understanding of the marketplace, your customers, your buyers, and your users, right? So we can make sure that we have a competitive differentiator too. From there, that research will input into the corporate strategy, and the corporate strategy is simply defined as the proper allocation of our people, money, and time in the pursuit of profitable revenue.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right after that, we need to look at the product strategy. So the product strategy is really, the launching and building of products that serve a market need that the customers are willing to pay for, that are still aligned with the corporate strategy. Right? Then if you look at the marketing strategy, in its simplistic terms, it's just marketing is driving demand for our products and our services. Sales is taking that demand and turning it into revenue. And then as you mentioned earlier, when we talked about the performance pieces, the final piece is the talent piece, right? Because it is important. We've got to make sure we've got the right people in the right positions in order to execute the strategy.
That was great. That just happened. So thanks for walking us through that sequence. Why don't we take a short break and let our viewers know about some of the new offerings from SBI. And after the break, we'll continue to unpack the podcast with Jill Konrath.
Do you have too many things to do and not enough time to do them? Is finding time to learn best practices almost impossible? The SBI Podcast is your solution. Turn time spent exercising, commuting, and traveling into productive learning time with a subscription to the SBI Podcast. SBI Podcast listeners get unique insight into real-world sales and marketing issues through interviews with your industry peers every week. Find us on iTunes by searching for Sales Benchmark Index Podcast and subscribe today.
Welcome back. My name is Andrew Urtiaga, and I'm with my co-host, Drew Kiran. Today, we're discussing a recent podcast that Drew and I listened to titled $1 Million Insights, Joining the Agile Sales Revolution with Jill Konrath. When we last left off, we disagreed with Jill's statement that the key to accelerate growth is finding the right people. Although an important component, I wouldn't start there. We also disagreed with her statement of troubleshooting problems across the buying cycle. This is when we walked our audience through the concept of strategic alignment through the lens of the 6-step revenue growth methodology.
Okay, so let's get back at it. So Jill was touching on improving sales reps' results, right? And she was asked the question, how can sales reps improve results? So why don't we go back and take another listen and hear what Jill has to say.
Okay.
What's something that you think is really common that many companies should look at first to improve their sales results? You talk about their website or how they're engaging with leads.
All right, the first thing that I would do if I was any company is I would start doing a customer immersion with my people. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is most sales organizations have not given their salespeople enough insight into who their customer is, the status quo that they're currently operating with, the issues and challenges that they would be actually facing if they were using system A, system B, old system C, or some conglomerate of things that were clumped together.
Okay, so you heard her. Immerse your people with customer knowledge, right? You need to give them insights. Mm-hmm. Good, yeah, I'll give it.
Sounds like a good statement. Okay. And I would add here, though, she does a good job of talking about having a deep knowledge on the customers. And that is one section which you defined earlier on market research, right? We talked about market research being having a deep understanding of the markets, the accounts, the buyers, and the users. So buyer segmentation is what we call that, and that sits inside the market research.
Right.
So I'd say that she got 25% of it right? We have to arm the reps in the field, the sales organization and the marketing organization with the entire market research.
Now that's sugary goodness right there.
I know. It's pretty good.
But another question, let's go back into it. So another question that Jill was asked was, how does agile sales differ from other strategies? So once again, let's listen in and hear what Jill has to say firsthand.
The other thing I'd like to talk about is the concept of agile sales, which you literally wrote the book on.
I did.
You did. What are the key concepts of agile sales, and how is it different from other sales strategies that came before it?
Every time you allow salespeople to go get them yourself, you're actually slowing down your entire learning curve. And what salespeople really need to learn is the mindset that will work for them, that'll be most efficient, and help them become the kind of person they want to be. They need to learn the process of rapid learning. It's not something that we've ever been taught about in our schooling. I mean, you ask people, what rapid learning strategy is your favorite? And they look at you with blank eyes.
Cramming before tests?
yeah, and that's not really very good because the retention from that strategy.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so salespeople need to learn the process of rapid learning. Jill, you're killing me here. I mean, come on. I was starting to come around a little bit, but then that happened, right? So the process of learning or enabling a sales organization is not a strategy, but it's a tactic. And it's also a two-way street, right? So it's another critical, although it's critical to the overall sales professional, this is just more of a competency issue than anything else. And it really goes back to, the tactics versus strategy conversation, where strategy is about doing the right things, where tactics is about doing things right.
So let's define here for our viewers what they're looking at on the graph.
Okay.
Across the horizontal axis on the top, we have what is strategy, as you said before, Drew. This is doing the right things. And then on the vertical axes, we have tactics, which is doing things right.
Yep.
If you look at this 2x2 matrix across the top, the first column is having an ineffective strategy and having an effective strategy on the second column. On the tactics side of things, on the bottom row, we have an inefficient way of executing tactics and then an efficient way of execution on the tactics. I'm going to start and describe each quadrant for our listeners and our viewers, starting with the upper left-hand corner, which is dying fast. This is defined as a poor plan executed brilliantly. So you could see that, right?
Yeah.
If we don't have a plan, but we're doing a bunch of things right, we might be driving the car in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Underneath that, in the bottom left-hand corner, we have die slowly, which is a poor plan executed poorly. That's just a train wreck.
Yeah.
If we move over, going counterclockwise in the bottom right-hand corner, what we have is survival, which this is a brilliant plan executed poorly. And then finally, in the upper right-hand quadrant, which is where most of our listeners and audience are striving to be, is thriving, which is the brilliant plan executed flawlessly.
Yeah. No, I love it too, right? So it's so important when you look at that too in doing that. And when you're looking at companies, and it's interesting when you start to look at the 4 different buckets and say, you start to think about, okay, I know this company's in this one, I know this company's in this one. Most of our listeners are the idea is to get up to the Thrive category, correct? Correct. So that's where everybody's trying to go. A lot of them are probably in the Survive category right now, and there's certain things they can do that'll enable them to get there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think most people, when they look at this, I think you got to be careful too, because they're going to put themselves, each individual leader will look at this inside a functional organization or an organization, each of the functional leaders will look at this and say, oh, I've got a strategy and my guys are executing brilliantly, so I'm in the thriving. However, in the context with the other functional leaders, product, marketing, how they're going to market, it might not necessarily all be plotted together in the upper right-hand quadrant. So the key here is everyone being in the Thrive quadrant, not just one functional leader plotting themselves there.
Yeah, and it's important to get one version of the truth too. I can't tell you how many times I've been in and you show this graph and you talk to a CEO and they tell you, well, we're over here too. And then as you talk to the functional leaders too, maybe they're a little bit more transparent and they start to look at that as well too. So I think it's getting everybody to agree where they are and then what are the steps to get into where they need to be.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So let's do this. Let's take another break to give our audience a chance to hear about some new SBI offerings or where they can find out more about the revenue growth methodology. And when we come back, we'll discuss how leaders should change their strategy.
Making your number is hard. Your problems are complex. Complex problems need complex solutions. Introducing the SBI Magazine. Read in-depth stories written by award-winning journalists about how your peers have overcome their problems to make the numbers. When you need more than a tweet, social post, or blog article, turn to the SBI Magazine. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com to subscribe.
Welcome back. My name is Drew Kiran. I'm with my co-host, Andrew Urtiaga. Today we're discussing a recent podcast we listened to entitled $1 Million Insights, Joining the Agile Sales Revolution with Jill Konrath. If you're just joining us, here's what you missed. We took Jill's podcast and we put it up against emerging best practices in order to accelerate growth. We then defined the different strategies that make up the 6-step revenue growth methodology. So why don't we keep going, do you?
Yeah, let's review one more question from the podcast. I think we have enough time for one more. The question was posed to Jill, how should sales leaders change their strategy?
For a sales manager that's working in an organization that's still stuck in the stone age of sales strategy, how do you advise them to shake things up and push for change at their organization?
One thing I think they should do right away is to start with their own team and start doing something different. Whether the whole organization is in the Stone Age or even just in 2010.
Right, which really is the Stone Age at this point. Things move so fast.
Yeah, we don't have to go back too far. I mean, I see a lot of companies where, it's very pedantic and they haven't been quick to adapt to technology or leverage some of the things that are available to salespeople right now. Mm-hmm. I think as a sales manager directly who wants to institute change, starting right away with their own team, they need to create a culture of experimentation. And that's a change, a culture of learning and experimentation. They need to get out to their salespeople and say, you guys, we can do better. We can do better. We need to start trying some new things. So let's challenge ourselves. And they need to say, okay, here are some problems that we're facing right now. We're all smart people. Let's open our brain in our mind to different solutions.
So Drew, she says, shake things up and create a culture of experimentation.
You're not going to get me started now, are you?
What? Are we breaking out lab coats and becoming scientists? What is this? It's an experiment. No way. Being creative and thinking outside the box, I think there are important things and traits to have in a team. But what you might have is kind of a trial and error process, right? It's the process of, success by the effort of the heroic few. And I think that works if you're a startup or a small company. You're trying to define yourself. But when you're a mid-sized to an enterprise organization and you want to scale, it's not going to work. So another way to look at this is using the 6-step revenue growth maturity model. Organizations are using this model to assess the impact of strategic alignment and where the weak link is in the revenue growth value chain. As we developed this model, we discovered a strong correlation between the assessed level and 2 key metrics. Yep. The cost to acquire a customer, which the acronym there is CAC, and the customer lifetime value, the CLTV.
Sure.
As the maturity level improves, what we notice is that the CAC is reduced and the CLTV is improved. So why don't we put up the model and walk the audience through the model?
Okay.
So for our listeners, we'll walk through the model, Drew, and for our viewers, they can probably see the graph on the screen.
Yep.
Why don't we walk through each of these and explain what we mean?
Okay.
So level 1 is called chaos. Love the name, right?
Exactly.
And just picture this organization, everybody's running around doing busy things, but nobody knows or has a sense of direction. And a good indication that you're in level 1 chaos is a corporate strategy may or may not exist, but for sure the functional strategies don't exist. And so because of this, you have very small pockets of results or success. What you'll see in these organizations is a high cost to acquire a customer and a low customer long-term value, right? And a lot of this is happening because you have high customer churn. The second level is defined. So what you have here is a corporate strategy is defined, functional strategies are defined, however, they're not implemented.
They're done at the annual planning process once a year, put on the shelf.
Collect a little bit of dust. And you'll see some improvements in the cost to acquire a customer and the long-term value. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. But then we move on to level 3, which is implemented. So the difference between level 2 and 3 is that you have a corporate strategy, you have functional strategies, and they're implemented. However, they're still built in isolation from one another. So you have the annual planning meeting, and then everybody runs off, builds their own strategy, and tries to execute within each of their own functions.
Right, so there's still friction there, and customers are still confused.
Correct. And so once again, you'll have an improvement in your cost to acquire the customer, and you'll have a reduction in the cost to acquire a customer, and then an improvement in your customer lifetime value. The fourth level, and this is probably where you see the biggest lift, is managed. And in manage, you have a corporate strategy, you have functional strategies, and you have alignment internally with all the functions, right? And so because of this, you see great tactical execution across the functions and working in conjunction with one another. And you're going to see the biggest lift in your customer acquisition, the biggest reduction in your customer acquisition and the biggest increase in your customer lifetime value. So let's talk about the last level, level 5, which is predictable. All right, and what you're going to see in the predictable level is corporate strategy is defined and implemented. Functional strategies are defined and implemented. They're strategically and internally aligned with one another. But the difference between level 5 and level 4 is the fact that they're aligned with the external market. The market research that you spoke about earlier, right? A deep understanding of the markets, the accounts, the buyers, and the users, drawing those insights and information to properly build the corporate and the functional strategies with one another.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Between level 1 and level 5, what's the overall difference as it relates to customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the workbook does a great job of actually at each level defining the improvement or the reduction in the customer acquisition cost and the improvement in the customer lifetime value. For the purposes and with the time that we have, let's just discuss the differences of level 5 compared to level 1. And at level 5, predictable, what you will see is a reduction in your cost to acquire a customer by 30%. And you'll see an improvement in your customer lifetime value by 26%. So you can see the massive incremental improvement. And really, at the end of the day, the question that I pose to our audience is, do you want people running around, as Jill discussed, experimenting, trial and error, trying to be creative? Or do you want to put your resources in a position where you give them the greatest probability of success?
Yeah, well, obviously the latter. So I don't want to sound like Captain Obvious, but you do seem a little bit down on this podcast. So let me ask you the question.
Complete downer.
Pretender or contender?
It's a complete pretender. I think where she missed the mark was really the whole concept of strategic alignment. She really missed it.
Yeah, and I have to say, it's a first-round knockout. There's no two ways about it. Well, I mean, we promised our listeners a hard-hitting show, so why don't we take it from there and tell them what can our listeners do?
Okay. I think what our listeners should do, what I know they should do, is download the 2016 research report, How to Make Your Number in 2016, and go through pages 27 through 34 with the other functional leaders. The key there is don't fill it out in isolation. Sit at the table, spend the time with the other functional leaders, and answer the questions. What you're going to see there is that it highlights the 6-step revenue growth methodology that we discussed today.
Right. Well, it's set up in a workbook format, right? So it's not a fill-in-the-form type thing. It's an actual working session that should be done.
Yep.
If you feel you might not be in strategic alignment, you can have one of our experts lead you through a workshop which will detail how to do this. You can register for that at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-workshop and just simply request a workshop. So Andrew, thanks for going the rounds with me. I hope our audience enjoyed it.
Pleasure always being here. For our listeners and our viewers, always enjoy it.
Yep, and I want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in. This show has become very popular, and it's because of you, our audience, that makes this all possible. So until next time, we wish you much success as you try and make your number.
Thanks, everyone.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.